Hey everyone, this is DayTraderRockStar, and this is the high probability watch list for the week of January 7th. Now, I want to do a lot on this video, so sit back, relax, probably grab yourself something to drink. I myself am going to open up my first Coca today. Ah, that feels so good. Just came back to the office, had a little dinner, but I've been researching all day on Friday. Normally, that I spend Fridays doing a lot of research, and I got to tell you, after a tremendous 2 weeks, markets are very close to recent highs, new highs, 52-week highs, very close to that level. And the markets, and that could be reflecting a lot of stocks and a lot of patterns. Even though there is still a lot of great setups out there, I wanted to, start off showing you what I'm looking at here is the FinViz map. And what I wanted to do, because in some instances when we do look at HPS setups, which I really define as a the definition of a high probability setup is where certain indicators all line up and give us the highest probability area in the market to take a low risk entry and a higher reward. So, when that doesn't happen, it's important not just to throw stuff out there, and even though I do have some great setups here, I also want to add, into the video every week for the members is, a lot of the education that goes along with that. So I want to use this time because go over some of my research, the techniques I use to research. Lots of times I'm looking at quality stocks in a pullback, and one of the tools I use is the finviz.com site, which gives you a market map on the S&P 500. Now all of a sudden the S&P 500 gives you 500 stocks to actually look at. And I look at them in this way where I could actually go over to here and pull down a chart, and it gives me performance by week, by month, 3 months, 6 months, year to date. And when I look at when I'm looking at the type of style of trades that I look at, and we know what they look like, they have a very, very similar pattern, and that's why they're a high probability setup, because they have a similar pattern. I want to show you exactly what I mean. We're going to go back over here for a second and just take a look at TDC, which was a recent HPS setup. And you can see, most of the setups are these downtrending pullback plays that are pulling back to a support line. And a support line doesn't have to be a identified support parallel line, which recent support, but the support also could be this downward channel line or a trend line, where these points, these pivot areas, all line up on an axis. And then you could calculate the next point it comes down to. Basically, 2 points make a straight line. You extend that line out. It connects to a third one. That third one really transforms that or really confirms that trend line. And then, when you get down to that fourth time it gets down to that line, you have yourself an interesting level. And with that interesting level, I use other indicators. So I want to have major two things setting up. I want to have an oversold daily and an underlying trend line to be lining up. And now the tighten up or the HPS setups, I break it down to the 60-minute chart. Now this trade is already passed, but at the point when I announced it was an HPS, it was around 12/5, December 5th. So you can go back here and you can see this stock has been measured out and mapped out as I show it during the show. During the show, I show you, what I'm looking at, and you can see that we got oversold. We had a coil stochastic, and I kind of outlined this as the high probability setup here. And we got a nice move out of it. And then we have a second high probability setup, which is a secondary entry, which is called a channel breakout stochastic rotation. And that's on the 60-minute chart. Now it was another entry. And then we took profits again. And then you got another entry right there. So, this is, a great stock to trade is one that continues to come back into a recognizable pattern, sets up properly. But sometimes they're going to set up properly. Sometimes they're not going to set up properly. It's so important to have the patience to wait for that perfect setup, because as we know, the perfect setup comes around eventually, and when it does come around eventually, that's when I'm here. I want to show you those, and I want to show you how I find those. I want to show you how to trade those, and one of the things I do is using this FinViz market map, this sector map, the S&P 500 broken down to multiple sectors, and those stocks broken down to sectors. And I turn out to the 6-minute period performance area, and red represents it hasn't been performing well in the past 6 months. Green, of course, has been performing well, and the neutral colors or the darker colors are neutral. So, but what we look for is something that's bunched up, like certain stocks that are bunched up, and that tells me that a sector or a certain industry has been performing weaker than normal or altogether. It's not an individual stock that's kind of a stock that's just getting hit because of bad news, anything like that. But I want a sector that maybe, here's you have the independent oil and gas, Occidental Petroleum, Apache, Devon Energy. Here you have cigarette makers, Altria, Reynolds America. You also have Coca-Cola and Pepsi-Cola. Here the utilities, a lot of utilities companies, energy companies, all set up. And this is something to start your research off of. You can go back down here and take a look at some of these stocks have set up. And here we go, TDC, HPQ. TDC is one that I'm looking at right now, and you can see it's on the red for the last 6 months. So I might see that on my chart, take a look at it, and say, wow, it actually had a nice pullback, on the daily. So what's telling me here? I have an underlying trend line. Look, it's oversold. Let's time it with the 6 days, put out the alert, take the trade, and be done with it. Now start to follow it more closely. Simple as that. It's not as, we don't have to run around and try to figure out what's going on with the markets. All we have to do is have a set of rules, wait for those rules to be triggered, and then take the trade. All right? So that's, one of the techniques I use for finding these setups. Another one is, because we're looking for certain individual patterns, and I count on the stochastics a lot to be in a certain level before I take a long, or be in a certain level before I take a short. And the time between that is, a time that I don't feel is the highest probability. So I might let that pass until I get the signal I want. And I have a little formula that I put in here just to get my pure stochastic oversold levels. And basically, it's kind of just a formula, stochastics. Depending on what that trading program you just you set your code to scan for stochastics that broken down into 20 or over 80 or whatever your criteria is, basically. And that kind of takes a lot of the work for me. And then I could do the scan, and then all of a sudden start to see some of the setups, so I don't have to constantly manually or visually look at every single stock out there. It kind of gives me stocks that are already setting up. So I have that going for me. So I go through those things, and then I go through a visual scan of about 300 stocks that I have traded in my history of trading, and I continue to put those into a watch list, and I review those, and I continue, because the more and more you trade a stock, the more and more familiar you get with it, and you know how it reacts. And it's great to just kind of every week go back to it and say, oh, all of a sudden this stock is setting back up. I see an underlying trend line, very confident. I traded it before. I know how it reacts, and you take the trade. And it's more of a job. It's more of a business. It's no longer a casino that we're working with here. Casino, again, I wake up in the morning, I don't know what I'm going to trade. I get in there, I hear something's running, or I read something on the chat boards. It seems like good. Oh no, the market's running away. Let me get into something fast. I need to make some money, and you're gambling. Then this is predetermined. You're waiting. You're marking everything. Every analogy you could use goes along. Success, across the board in baseball, in sports, and in anything that you do. Patience and waiting for the best opportunity is always the best way of doing it. And, that's what we do. That's what the HPS setups are doing. So I want to talk about those now. I just had to take a drink. I was talking so much I started getting parched there. So anyway, we talk about the stochastics and the trend lines and waiting for those two main indicators. Then we have other things called divergences. We have support lines. We also have reversal candlesticks. All this plays into the same thing. The more indicators that line up, the better the percentage of the trade working out. So in the case, this is a stock that I constantly look at every day, and I map out, and we've traded many times. And now it's just about waiting for the next setup or the next really great setup. But that's what you'll see. A lot of lines on the chart look sloppy, but it's just really notes that happen real time notes. So let's start off with some great looking stocks that just were setting up, and we took off this week, and then we're going to take a look at the new setups that are set up. Not, I have a couple good HPS setups are lining up this week, and it took me, a good 5 hours to finally come across a couple. I took a different scan that I normally don't use, and I started coming across some better stocks here, so I think you're going to be happy. All right, this is a recap of last week's HPS setup. And again, the HPS setup can be found on the site underneath the video. It's a separate site. It's a site where I put in all the stocks. I put the charts in there. The triggers get all programmed into the site. When the trigger is hit, a buy trigger is hit or a sell trigger is hit, you get the email, you get the notification if you're in the room, you get the email if you're out of the room, at your work or whatever and stuff. And basically these, I tend to stick to all the rules that these are all HPS setups. They have to fit certain criteria, the highest probability, best trades out there, the HPS sites. Not that I'm not going to take other trades. There's definitely other trades out there, but the only ones that I want to put in here are quality stocks, HPS setups, stuff that you remember, stuff that fall into a direct, indicator watch list and everything that lines up perfectly. And you'll notice many of the stocks have a very similar pattern to them. We're talking about Coca-Cola, one of the first ones. Again, you can see that downward trend line. What's great about this site is it enables us to put the alert in, and then as you go back and check it, it'll update you on the chart. So here's a chart you would find on there, and each day, as you're following it yourself, of course, I would hope that you would be able to input some of these triggers and zones into your own programs. But if not, you could just follow along. The green area, the green area represents the buy zone. The gold area, the yellow zone, is the profit zone. So once it pulls into the buy zone, that's where I'm interested in it. I usually discuss it in the video. In this case, it was a double bottom downward channel, oversold stochastics. You can see everything here lined up properly. And then from that point on, we bounced and we ran right up to the top part of the channel. We took profits. Actually took profits today. And that's discipline right there for you. That's a perfect trade right there. Now it's still, in a very good channel. So if it happened to pull back and give us another setup, this is definitely in my focus now for the next couple of weeks, because it is definitely a recognizable pattern. So it's an easy trade now, and I consider this thing, we can go back to that trade multiple times. Same thing, ICE today actually, even though I'm holding ICE a little bit longer. When I recognized this as an HPS setup last week, we recognized multiple pivot areas, downward wedge pattern, fast little profit area back up to here. You can see, just push that little arrow, you can see exactly. We held that level, and look at this. Look at how we pushed right back up here. Now this continues to look really good. We have a pivot area up here. We have multiple pivot areas down here. So this represents what we call a 1-2-3 pattern. And overall target would be a parallel channel, not just a wedge pattern, but a parallel channel. And this would bring us up here, probably up in that 131 to 132 zone. So this still looks really good. Big pop today. But again, another classic example of an HPS setup. And this one actually had a buy trigger, meaning we wanted to see strength in this stock before we took the entry. And we also want to take profits when profits should be taken. Again, very similar characteristics of an HPS. Has to be a recognizable pattern, lower trend line, oversold stochastics, daily 60. Textbook entry, textbook exit. Great stock right there. And again, these are TDC. We talked about this one just before, and this was just the second. This is a secondary entry, just off the 60-minute chart, and you can see pull back into it, pulled a little bit underneath the buy trigger, but was never really concerned too much. Again, the market is very volatile, so you have to give yourself a little room. Never really came down under the 60 level, which I would pretty much define as an area you might want to put your stop in, but. It performed well, pushed right back up into the profit zone. We took profits on it and we moved on. So another successful trade this week. Melanex, I have to tell you something. Even though it didn't trigger, it was a stock that was on the watch list. I see I don't know why it's not triggered. The buy trigger was 62.20. It never really got back. It looks like it did. It should be triggered. I don't know why it's not triggered on here. But in either case, I was in it. I actually bought this off an HPS setup. And it is a good HPS setup. And here's one of the rare cases where, a company will come out and it'll give a profit warning, or it'll be a halt, or it'll be some kind of news out there. And every stock is subject to that. Even the best stock. I don't care if you're talking about Coca-Cola, Dollar General, Disney. If they say, well, we're going to lower our guidance, or, we're not seeing sales like they used to be, it's going to gap down. In this case, this gap down about 10 points. It's just part of the process of sometimes being in the market. There's always those little landmines, and you just have to pick yourself back up, clear off the thing, and continue to stick to the methodology. The methodology is not the failure here. It's just that the company issued a warning, and that's part of trading. So, Melanex, not happy that it didn't work out. Yum Brands, YUM. Now, we did take this trade last week. I put it back on the watch. I kept it on the watch list to see if if we could get back down to this level. And it did tag that level, and it did take this trade off of this level, but you can see where it just rocketed back up real fast. It tagged it for a minute, probably didn't get registered there. It gapped down on the brands, but other than that, you see a very recognizable underlying channel line. Everything really nice on that one too. So we continue on. Activision. Now Activision, I try to keep everyone in this trade because the 50. This is a beautiful trade, and the top was 1050. We tagged the 1050 level, but I told people, I said, unless you're really closing underneath it, really, this is still a valid trade. Double bottom, downward channel, and we actually hit our profit target today. Beautiful trade, actually. Beautiful setup. Beautiful chart. Everything about it. Target. I was in Target. Let's see. Do you see a very similar situation here? Very similar patterns playing out. Look how this came right down to that lower trend line. Got our, triggered that lower trend line. It's funny because it got a downgrade day after it gets an upgrade. Funny how things work like that, huh? Sometimes you just got to believe in the chart, not worry about what the news is, the analysts out there, because half the time they're wrong anyway. And we could go on and on and on. Vodafone here, beautiful. I mean, it was a superb watch list last week. You had plenty of opportunities here. Double bottom. We talked about the double bottom setup. Look at this. I mean, comes right into the buy trigger, right up to the sell zone. If you took the trade, you had a beautiful trade. I didn't get into this one. It still actually looks good, and I would expect probably some more upside off of this double bottom. But that's it. I mean, we go into more. All these are going to come off. We have some new ones going on. These haven't been triggered. The CHK is actually one for this week, and we're going to go start the new list right now and take a look at those.